During the summer of 1999, my friend Sean and I worked out an arrangement. For 2 weeks, we traded consoles. I had a PlayStation, and he had a Nintendo 64. I had Final Fantasy VII. Sean had Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Now, I was absolutely excited to check it out, as he and I had been telling each other about the two games for a while. Now, of course, there were other games that we had, but those were the two games that made us really want to do this temporary trade. Now, back then, I didn't get to beat the game, but I delved in pretty deep and I was blown away. I never did get an N64, so as much as I enjoyed the game, I never got to properly play it back then. I did purchase it again for the Wii years later via the Virtual Console, but I again only played a few hours. At the time, I just had way too much going on in my life to put that kind of time into a game. By then, I had seen a ton of Let's Play videos and several of the documentary videos on this platform, so I pretty much knew how the game went. I knew the story, and it wasn't how I wanted it, but at least I felt like I had secondhand experience with the game. And that was always enough for me. Well, up until now. Since relaunching this channel, I decided that I wanted to focus on making videos about the games that I truly love, as well as titles that I've really always just wanted to play. And as I was about halfway through my last video, I went back and watched one of the videos that led to me creating this kind of content anyways, which is Liam Triforce's yet another Ocarina of Time retrospective. And yes, I do see the irony in that title being the one that made me want to make this video. But as I was watching it, I started to feel a desire to play the game for myself. I wanted to experience it firsthand, and I wanted to document this experience as I'm playing through it, and really dig deep and finally beat this game. I know that there's been so many others who have traveled this path already, and because of that, I originally started to work on a few different games in the meantime. But after putting a lot of thought into it, I decided I would just play the game that I really wanted to play the most, and then make a video that I'm most excited to work on, and that was Ocarina of Time. Even right now, as I'm writing this, I've only just reached Zoras Domain. This game has meant so much to so many people over the years, and is considered by many to be one of the best games ever made, and yet, I know it does definitely have its detractors.
Ocarina decided to add in bullshit!
In this video, we will be taking a deep dive into the game, taking some time and exploring and experiencing this game together as I bring you along from my journey through this classic title that came out during a time when Nintendo desperately needed classic titles like this to carry them through. I'm the Unhinged Gamer, and this is one more retrospective on a game that helped define a console generation. Please join me as we journey through Hyrule in this Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time retrospective. In 1996, Nintendo was facing the biggest challenge that the company had ever encountered. They had been the phoenix rising from the ashes in the 80s as they resurrected the video game industry in the United States after the massive video game crash of 1983. The US video game market had become so oversaturated with virtually no quality control, and it had gotten to the point that nobody was able to make any money on video games. Several developers fell by the wayside. Atari, which had been the market leader, was a shell of its former self. Nintendo launched the Nintendo Entertainment System in the US, a remodel of their hit Japanese console, the Famicom, and took an iron grip on the gaming industry. Now, by the early 90s, Nintendo faced their first great rival as Sega launched the Genesis in the United States, and the two went to war. The Super NES eventually just barely came out the victor. Sega had garnered a lot of third-party support and loosened the grip that Nintendo had been holding onto the industry since they first launched the NES. Now, Nintendo was still on top, but the war with Sega was only the beginning. A new challenger was emerging, and a new console was about to enter the battle. Sony's PlayStation hit the US in 1995, and while it was not the first console of the new generation, it became the top console in the industry in short order. The PlayStation was cheaper and easier to develop for than Nintendo's next console. Plus, their next console wouldn't even hit shelves until a year later, giving Sony a huge lead. Nintendo had lost some of their biggest support in this time, as brands like Final Fantasy, which had been a huge boost to the NES and Super NES, were now moving over to the PlayStation. Nintendo dropped their new console, the N64, with only 2 titles, and as good as Mario was, they needed another heavy hitter in a bad way. Ocarina of Time was put together by an all-star team of some of the biggest names that Nintendo had, as they knew just how important this game was. There was this conception that Nintendo's new console couldn't really create huge sweeping epics, as several studios who wished to make those types of games were moving them all over to the competition. The series creator Shigeru Miyamoto worked alongside 5 directors, including the man who has become as synonymous with the series as Miyamoto himself, Eiji Aonuma, and writer Kensuke Tanabe. They were working on a prequel to the entire series, and they had a massive challenge of taking Zelda and moving the franchise into the 3D space. Now, Nintendo had shown that they were fully capable of creating outstanding 3D titles by this point, but they had not yet tackled a game that would carry the weight of being a Zelda title. There was a desire to make this game have a cinematic feel, wanting the players to get swept up in the narrative and world. They had seen Square make bank with the cinematic masterpiece that was Final Fantasy VII, which was no doubt a sore point for Nintendo. Now, if Super Mario 64 was the world's first real introduction to Nintendo in 3D, Ocarina of Time would be their mission statement, wanting to show everybody that N64 was capable of delivering epic stories and sucking people into the worlds that are created for the system. And they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Releasing in November 1998, Ocarina of Time received extremely positive reviews. The game was critically loved, achieving something that even the best games today rarely pull off, getting tons of perfect scores. If you check out the Wikipedia, ironically the only publication listed that did not give a perfect score was Nintendo Power. The graphics for this game were incredible for their time, and honestly, it still looks pretty good today, so long as you look at it and take it for what it is. The world was vibrant and lively, with a lot to do, especially for a game in 1998. The score was also heavily praised, and rightly so, as the game features one of the most iconic soundtracks for the entire series, and stands among the best scores of any video game from the era. Now, in terms of sales, Ocarina was a massive success, one of the best-selling games for the system, and had even been recognized at that time for having the highest number of pre-orders of any video game up until then, more than triple any of the previous video games. But now we've touched, just barely, on some of the story that led to this game. So let's go ahead and take a step back into the game and see just what made Ocarina of Time so special. The game begins with a nightmare. Link sees Princess Zelda being rushed away from the castle before running into Ganondorf, the Gerudo thief who has been the bane of Hyrule for the majority of the series. But this is the first time that we've actually seen him as a man. Ganondorf had been to this point known as Ganon, and was a large boar creature who was hell-bent on the destruction of Hyrule. This is how the game immediately places itself at the beginning of the series up to this point. This game will tell the story of how Ganondorf became the Demon King Ganon. The opening of Ocarina of Time was an immediate change of pace from the previous entries in the franchise. Hell, the original Legend of Zelda just opened up by dropping Link into Hyrule with no direction and no story unless you read the manual. Ocarina of Time showed us just how much gaming had evolved since the rise of Nintendo. Then again, this game started flexing its muscles the moment it starts up, with the title screen showing Link riding through Hyrule Field at night on horseback. It was clear from the title that Nintendo were confident that they had something special here. From the opening moments of the game, it made it clear that this was going to be different from anything else that Nintendo had ever put out. The original premise of The Legend of Zelda was exploration, and the original game was in many ways the prototype for all modern open world games. You could go anywhere from the start and it didn't hold your hand. Ocarina, on the other hand, was gonna be different. It was a narrative heavy game, and while you're free to do a lot, it was far more linear than the original. Here, Nintendo had a story to tell, and an adventure that was crafted specifically to give N64 players an unforgettable experience. If you take a look on YouTube for Ocarina of Time reviews and retrospectives, you'll get flooded with videos. And I'm aware that this is just one more of many, but it's because of how many people have played this game that were just touched by it that so many people have something to say. It's incredible that there's still such a strong community for this game this many years later. Nintendo was doing something right here, and in many people's opinions, this was peak Zelda. But anyways, enough of that tangent, let's get back into the game. We head from the nightmare with Ganon through the Kiri Forest and the Great Deu Tree, which is the guardian of the forest and the father of the Kokiri, which are a race of forest children who stay young, similar in some respects to the Lost Boys from Neverland. The Deu Tree gives us some exposition here, telling us about the evil threatening the world as he summons Navi the fairy to fetch Link, the boy without a fairy. Link is the only child of the Kokiri that doesn't have his own fairy, showing that from the start he's different, and something's off about him. Navi gives us an incredibly cinematic view of the forest as she searches for Link. And as a kid, I was blown away by this entire sequence, and even now, I find myself being sucked into the world of Hyrule as I watch Navi weaving through the forest. Eventually, Navi finds Link and has to prod him awake. And the way that the game shows Link as this sleepy kid that Navi's unsure of here is a great way to set the scene. He has no idea that he's anyone special. He's just the weird kid without a fairy. And we're not taking the reins of legendary hero. Well, I mean we are, but he's not a hero yet. He has to become a hero, and we get to experience that journey. The Kiri Forest is one of the best examples in the history of gaming of a tutorial level. It's an open area where you can acclimate yourself to the controls. Now remember, this game came out in the early days of 3D. Developers were still learning the technology, and things as simple as moving a character across any terrain was still a tall order. Nobody had a system yet. Nintendo, though, had hit gold in this field with Mario 64, but Link is a far cry from Mario. The focus of the games is just entirely different. Link's controls didn't include a jump button. Things like that would happen conditionally. And it's not because they wanted to simplify Link's movement, they just had a lot going on with the controller for this game as it already was. Link has a massive arsenal of items throughout the entire game at his disposal, and they wanted to keep the game approachable to new players while maintaining a sophisticated controller setup. Anyway, let's get back to the Kiri Forest. This is the home of the children of the Great Deu Tree, and Link can go around the village and speak to the rest of the Kiri children. But when he gets to the path towards the Deu Tree, he's stopped by Milo, a particularly snotty Kokiri who seems to at least consider himself to be their boss. And he's not letting you through without a sword and shield. It doesn't matter that you've been summoned. Now you can buy a shield, but you've got to find the rupees necessary. The sword, on the other hand, must be found, forcing you to search the forest. This lets you understand right off that exploration is a key factor in this game. And while it's extremely simplistic compared to modern titles, the fact that every character here does have their own dialogue was another exciting thing that made it easy to get sucked into the game early on. I still remember my first time exploring this area. I was overcome with wonder, imagining what else this game had in store for me. I'd played some pretty impressive games for the time, but something about this one just felt mysterious. I mean, really, all the Zelda games felt that way to me back then, and they still do to this day if I'm being honest. There's just something about this series. The first dungeon is, of course, inside the Great Deu Tree. The Deu Tree tells Link that he's been cursed by Ganondorf and needs him to go inside and dispel the evil within. The great thing about this game's design is that there's enough to do in the Kiri Forest before getting there that you should already have a decent enough grasp on the controls to be ready for this dungeon. But at the same time, if you're an experienced player, you can get through the forest pretty quickly and be ready to enter the Deu Tree just about anytime you want. Once inside the Deu Tree, you can see that there's upper layers and a thick web blocking the lower section. This dungeon teaches the player how to play Ocarina of Time. You've got to figure out where to go, and you've got to get past some obstacles that you can't immediately traverse. This leads to a more obvious route where you get the slingshot. Now, after you get the slingshot, you can make your way higher. The enemies here, also, they'll show up throughout the rest of the game. Take for instance the Skulltulas here. They are a staple enemy for Ocarina of Time. Now once you get higher, you'll finally be able to take a leap of faith and make your way through the web down to the basement level. There's a pretty basic formula to the dungeons in this game, and you'll see pretty quickly. You find the map, then you get a special item from the dungeon, and then you fight the boss. It's really a simple formula, and it's effective. But most importantly, it's fun. The feeling of adventure as you're making your way through the Deu Tree keeps you motivated. There's always a drive in this game to see what's around the next corner. The first dungeon is not difficult at all, and to be fair, Ocarina of Time is not a difficult game. It's one of the easiest games in the franchise. And the team at Nintendo were intentional in that. They knew that this game needed to be approachable to as big an audience as they could possibly reach. As I stated before, this was the early days of 3D gaming and there was no roadmap. They were just trying to lay down tracks as the train rolled along. The decision to focus on making this game accessible and easy to pick up and play was huge for making it the success that it is. I mean, my 8th grade math teacher, Miss Knight, played Zelda for the N64. That's how I knew that this was a game that Nintendo wanted to be for everyone. Anyways, at the deepest depths of the Deu Tree, we find the cause of all of his suffering, Queen Gohma. This is an arachnid monster that looks intimidating and feels like a real threat when she appears. But this is also the first dungeon boss, so she's not a huge challenge. You've got to figure out her movements and then just find your opening attacks, using the slingshot to hit her eye so that you can get into swing with the sword. It's not a difficult battle, but it is fun and just enough challenge to it that you feel like you've actually accomplished something by defeating it. And as far as first bosses, coming up with something that looks intimidating is always a nice touch, and yeah, Queen Goma looks pretty scary, especially if you're a kid playing this. After you beat Goma, you head back out to the Great Deu Tree. He calls Link to action, telling him about the man who cursed him. He refers to him as a wicked man, telling Link that he is searching for a way to get into the sacred realm in search of the Triforce. And then, the Deu Tree tells the story of the creation of this world. 3 golden goddesses descended, Din, Nehru, and Furore, and together they created the earth and all living things before departing and leaving behind the Triforce, a relic holding the essence of the goddesses. It comes in 3 parts, the perfect balance of wisdom, power, and courage. The legends say that whoever wields the Triforce has ultimate power. I always found it interesting that the game calls them triangles. I mean, that just always felt weird, like the legend of the Triforce sounds very different than the legend of the triangles. But, I don't know, I digress. The Great Deu Tree warns Link that the wicked man from the desert must never get a hold of the Triforce. The entire world depends on keeping it away from him. Then the Deu Tree lets you know that despite succeeding, he's still dying, and he bestows Link with the sacred stone of the forest, the Kokiri Emerald, as he tells Link that he's Hyrule's only hope. Then, we see the Great Deu Tree die. It's a sombering moment. You've only just begun the game, and a being that you know is immensely important to the world is dead. This is where you have to remember that the Deu Tree isn't just a sentient tree. He is the father and protector of the Kokiri, the children of the forest. They just lost their leader, their protector, their father. Link was raised with him as his father too, so I mean, this is no doubt an emotional moment in the game. Even though Navi is immediately like, hey, let's get going. The dialogue in this game can feel a bit stilted with things like this happening and over-explanation at times, but it's all to serve the purpose of being approachable, so it is pretty easy to forgive that. But now it's time to depart our home and leave the forest. Link woke up this morning to finally find that he had his own fairy, just to see his father die, to try to save him and fail, and then be told that he's the only hope to save Hyrule. That's a lot, and he's just a boy. So this is a really monumental amount of stuff for him to process, but there's no time. Link has to leave the forest now. He has to leave his entire world behind, and his one true close friend, Saria. It's a sad moment, but she understands that Link is different, and while they'll always be friends, she has to let him go. But not before giving him the fairy Ocarina and teaching him her song, which will give them a way that they can stay in contact with each other. And with that bittersweet departure, we're off to save the world. But first, let's talk just a little bit about Hyrule Field. This is the central hub of the entire game. Hyrule Field connects all the various regions of Hyrule together, and is also the very first thing that you see in the game, featuring on the title screen. When Link first leaves the Kokiri Forest, he's been advised to go to Hyrule Castle, but you can go wherever you want, for the most part. There are things that will limit your access to certain areas here, but you can explore the field and figure out where pretty much everything's located. Toward the center of the field is Talon Ranch, which is a small section of the game, but it's also home to some great characters, and it's where you'll get your horse. Kakaro Village is in the northeast, which also leads to Death Mountain. To the east is Zora River, which leads to the Zoras Domain. Of course, there's the path back to the forest, but when you go to the south, you'll find Lake Hylia, and if you head a little bit further west, you'll access the Gerudo Desert. Hyrule Field does feel a bit empty, especially going by today's standards. But there are some secrets to find here. This game may not be a true open world, but the field gives you this feeling of an open exploration that was unprecedented for its time. Walking along the field and later riding along on your horse feels so freeing. This was the first time that we really got to ride a horse in a 3D environment like this, so it felt absolutely incredible at the time. The field is also where the game introduces you to its day and night cycle. Why is that so hard to say? It's virtually impossible to reach Hyrule Castle from the Kiri Forest before dark. No matter how fast you travel, when the wolf howls, the drawbridge is going to go up, leaving you stuck there waiting on morning before you can enter. It's about the same time that skeletons start to rise from the ground and attack. The night is clearly more dangerous than the day. Now, the day and night cycle was a unique gaming element at the time, with the NPCs running on a schedule between the day and night, so it would actually impact how you can approach certain characters in the game. Some people can be found only in the day or only at night. For example, during the Happy Mask Shop questline, there's a running man moving about Hyrule Field. You can follow him around during the day, but he won't stop to talk. But you still need to sell the bunny ear mask to him. So, if you follow him around, once it gets dark, the man will stop where he's at and rest, which will allow you to talk to him and finish that portion of the quest. And thankfully, when you're in dungeons or cities, the day and night cycle stops, so you don't have to worry about running out of time on a mission or while solving puzzles. Once morning comes, the drawbridge drops again and Link can enter Castle Town. This place is bustling with people and it's an exciting place to check out. There's some shops as well as a large temple there that we'll get to later, but right now you're on a mission. Link has to get to the castle, but the guards just tell you to get lost. Link has to get past the guards to get into the castle and then has to find a way in. Now Link can't sneak up around the guards to get to the castle, but the passage he needs to slip through to get inside is blocked by a sleeping Mario-looking man. If you've spoken to the girl by the tree earlier, she'll tell you that her father is at the castle making a delivery from Talon Ranch. You'll learn that her name is Malon and her father's name is Talon. And he's also kinda lazy. She'll give you an egg, and once it hatches, you can use the chicken, or I should say Kuko, to wake up Talon. He'll freak out and run off, and that'll let Link finally get past him and inside the castle. Now, if you get caught by the guards, they'll just kick you out. They aren't too worried about you because you're just a child. They just want to shoo you away. I mean, I could imagine it would be very different if you were an adult trying to sneak into the castle. But this whole experience of trying to get past the adults to meet with the princess adds a level of childish wonder to this game. You're just a kid out to save a world that has no idea that it's even in need of saving. Yet. Link will eventually get to Zelda and they discuss the nightmare. Zelda believes it's a premonition and warns Link about the king of the Gerudo, the desert thief Ganondorf, who's currently at the castle swearing fealty to the king of Hyrule. Zelda asks Link to go and find the sacred stones needed to open the Temple of Time, which is the large temple building that we saw in Castletown. She says that they must get to the sacred realm in order to fight off Ganondorf and save the world. Zelda gives Link his quest and teaches him Zelda's Lullaby, which is a song of the royal family, before she has Impa, the Sheikah leader and Zelda's sworn protector, sneak Link back out of the castle. Now, after you get out of the castle area, it's time to figure out where to go first. Link already has the Forest Emerald, but he needs 2 more stones. Technically, you can choose where to go next, but the logical next step to where the game is pushing you is Kakaro Village. That way you can head on up to Death Mountain. Kakaro Village is one of the 2 primary towns in the game. The village is home of the Sheikah. There's not a lot to it, but there are locations that are not easily accessible yet. Unless you're willing to take a leap of faith. One of the key locations for Kakariko is the graveyard, which hosts the royal family tomb. The people here are charming, especially the young boy in the graveyard, who desperately wants to be like Dampé the Gravekeeper. After a short exploration of the village, Link makes his way up to Death Mountain to visit the Gorons. The journey there leads you through a barren mountain region, showing a stark contrast to everything that you've seen thus far in the game. Once you reach the village, you'll see that their home is entirely carved right out of the mountain, and things aren't happy here. Their leader, Darunia, has locked himself away and is in a terrible mood, and the Gorons are all hungry. See, the Gorons survive off of eating rocks, and their favorite rocks are in the Dodongo Cavern. However, Ganondorf has caused the place to become dangerous with monsters, waking up King Dodongo so that the now picky Gorons are hungry, being way too good to eat other rocks. It's really a more lighthearted problem than you may expect in a big sweeping adventure game, but it's enough that they're all upset. You also find that with some investigation, Darunia loves the music of the forest, and with that, you can take your fairy ocarina and trek back out into the Lost Woods and find your friend Saria. Now, she'll gladly teach you a song, which can also allow you to communicate with her. Now, while using that song for communicating with Saria isn't really something that you have to do, it is a nice link back to your childhood friend. After learning the song, you travel back to Darunia and you play it for him, and that bit of nostalgic music causes him to dance with joy, able to forget his troubles briefly. Darunia thanks Link and tells him about the problem with the Dodongo. Link then valiantly goes into the cavern now to deal with the problem. The cavern offers a good challenge, and it's only a small step up in difficulty from the Deu Tree. The dungeons in this game have a pretty simple formula, especially the early dungeons. Link has to make his way through the different levels in search of keys that he needs to get to the boss. Now, after spending just a small amount of time with the Gorons, it is nice to get into a place that has some more color to it. The massive Dodongo on the wall is quite the striking visual when you first enter the cavern. After a little bit of exploration, Link will get to a battle with the Lizalfos. Now, they are a good simple test in using Z targeting for combat. There's 2, and they'll both take turns coming at Link. Now, just dodge and take a few swings after they hit your shield, and they'll go down pretty easily, but it is a good chance to try to, get your first time coming to grips with using Z targeting to duel with enemies. Eventually, you'll reach the head of the massive Dodongo on the wall, and just bomb its eyes to make it open up. Now you're on your way deeper to face the King Dodongo. This dungeon goes by pretty quickly, and the boss here is really intimidating to look at, but really, he's a pushover. Just toss some bombs in his mouth and he'll roll around the room and try to take Link out. All you really need to do is stay clear of him when he rolls, and stay out of the lava. Now I know this battle has received a lot of criticism for being too easy, but I enjoy it every time I get there. It's nice to feel like you're clever as you just outmaneuver this massive beast before driving the Dodongo into the lava, making the cavern safe for the Gorons again. Now, it's also a pretty cool visual seeing this creature just give up on the battle and launch itself into the lava, like it's just done. When you return to Darunia, the Gorons are happy and he gives you their spiritual stone, the Goron Ruby. Now, you've got 2 of the 3 stones and a friend for life. Only one more before we can get into the Temple of Time. Now we have to head back down the mountain and make our way south to start following the Zora River. The river is a fun yet simple challenge to pass through. Just be careful for the Octoroks. Eventually, as you're traveling, you'll reach the waterfall. Once you get there, just play Zelda's Lullaby and the path will open into Zoras Domain. And I've got to admit, using Zelda's Lullaby as a password is a pretty effective way to keep unwanted travelers out. The Zoras Domain is a massive cavern with a lake. This was one of my favorite locations in the game when I first played it as a kid. It felt like I was in a truly magical location. Swimming around with the Zora just felt incredible. Now remember, the gaming world was a different place back in the 90s. Now the Zora have their own issues going on, and when you get there you find out that Princess Ruto has gone missing. There's really nothing else to know at first. They ask you to help, and after exploring and running a minigame where you dive for rupees, you can figure out how to dive deep enough to find the portal that leads straight to Lake Hylia. When you get there, you'll see that there are a few Zora already here searching for the princess too. And while searching the lake, you'll find a jar, and inside is a letter from Princess Ruto saying that she's going inside the belly of Lord Jabu Jabu, a legendary fish for the Zora. The note also asks you not to tell her father, which of course you have to do anyways. Now once you do tell the king, he'll scoot aside so that you can get up to Lord Jabu Jabu. Once you get there, the only thing you have to do now is to become his dinner. Inside of Lord Jabu Jabu is the 3rd dungeon. Now, after barely heading inside, you'll find the princess, and she is not happy to see you. She says that she doesn't know what you're talking about when you tell her about the note, and she refuses to leave until she gets what she was there for. You know, typical stuck-up princess bullshit. So, we do the only responsible thing we can do, and we hoist the princess up as she passively resists by doing nothing to help you. And then you just make your way through the belly of the beast. There are several enemies here that can electrocute you, so for now it's best to just try to avoid them. But eventually you'll find the boomerang, which will let you wipe out these enemies safely. Now the boomerang is essential for this entire dungeon and is a lot of fun to wield, able to get around corners and just be effective in ways that the slingshot never was. Jabu Jabu also has a mini boss that can be fun or extremely frustrating. Big Octo. This guy circles a room with a spinning spiked platform. You've got to get behind him while he's stunned so that you can make attacks on him. And it's not the most challenging boss, but he can be really frustrating. Once you do eventually get to him and go through this guy, there's not a lot left to do here. You'll head up the platform and make your way to the final boss in Jabu Jabu, Baronade. Now, Baronade sends floating enemies after you and is covered with protective jellyfish. You've got to avoid them and his attacks while trying to stun him with the boomerang before taking out the jellyfish, or berry as they're called. Now once you chip away at his armor, it's just a matter of finding some openings and moving in for the kill. Once Baronade is defeated, Ruto appears in the teleporting light and it'll take you back to the Zoras Fountain. Ruto gives you the Zoras Sapphire, which is why she was in Jabu Jabu's belly to begin with, and then she promises to marry Link, as whoever is given the Zoras Sapphire is pledged to be her husband. Link, being a child, really doesn't know what she means, but he takes the stone anyway, as he needs it to help with Zelda's plan to save Hyrule. And now we just have to return to the castle and meet with Zelda to put the plan into motion. Of course, as things will go awry. As Link is approaching the castle, the princess and Impa are fleeing, just as in Link's nightmare. As they pass, Zelda throws something into the moat. Link then turns around to see Ganondorf on his horse, as he's chasing after Zelda. Everything they feared seems to be coming to pass. Ganondorf has betrayed the king. Link then dives into the moat and collects the Ocarina of Time, which is the final item needed to access the Sacred Realm. When he picks it up, Zelda communicates telepathically and teaches Link the Song of Time, which will open the door when combined with the spiritual stones. Now with Ganondorf chasing after the fleeing Zelda, Link rushes into Castletown and up into the temple. Once inside, Link will use the stones to open the gateway to the Master Sword, the Sword of Evil's Bane. It's now or never. Link knows that he has to do something, grabbing the sword to draw it from the stone. But as he does, Ganondorf arrives. It's been his plan from the start. He has manipulated everything and doubled back, following Link right into the Sacred Realm. Link awakens to find that 7 years have passed. He was only a child and not yet ready to be the hero of time. The sage Rauru explains the situation to Link. You're in the Sacred Realm now, and you're an adult. Link is now ready to be that hero. Ganon took the Triforce and brought Hyrule to kneel before him. He has come to rule over Hyrule, and his power is creating a much more dangerous and evil world. Rauru then charges Link to find the other sages and bring them to him. That way they can combine their powers with his so that he can take down Ganondorf. You're now finally able to be that hero of time. You're transported back to the temple 7 years in the future. And as you get ready to leave, you're greeted by a mysterious person who speaks in riddles about the locations of the sages, telling a Sheikah legend before identifying himself as Sheik, the last remaining of the Sheikah tribe. Sheik then speaks to guide you on where you need to go. This all plays out as one of the most incredible scenes in any game of that era. The reveal of Ganondorf entering the Sacred Realm and Link becoming an adult created a moment that has stood among the most important of the entire Zelda series. Now, it's time to make your way back to Kakaro Village. The castle town is in ruin, and redeads are everywhere. It's a nightmare scene to behold. The world has definitely changed, but thankfully, the further you get away from the castle, it does seem as if Ganon's influence is still domineering. but he hasn't quite taken over everything yet. There is still some small hope. But before we head to Kakariko, let's take a look at a special place in Hyrule that I've tried to avoid talking about until now. In the center of Hyrule Field is Talon Ranch. You can go there as soon as you leave the Kiri Forest if you like, and inside you'll meet the owner Talon, the same lazy bum that you met sleeping by the castle, as well as his disgruntled employee Ingo, who feels that he's not respected enough for the work that he does. It's a real interesting Mario and Luigi contrast here, and you can kinda understand why Ingo would have those disgruntled Player 2 issues on his mind. But more importantly than them, you'll meet Malon, and her pony Epona. Malon will teach you her song that she sings to the horses to calm them, and the ranch is a really peaceful place it's fun to just come and hang out in. Now, in the future as an adult, Ingo has taken over, given control of the ranch by Ganondorf, and Talon was ran out of the ranch. You'll find Talon at Kakaro Village sleeping in one of the houses there, thanks to the kindness of the people who own the house. Malon, however, stays behind to help with the horses, not wanting to leave them behind. Now when you go to the now extremely smug Ingo, he'll let you ride the horses for a price. Now when he does, you can play the song that Malon taught you, and Epona, which has become a pretty wild horse not wanting anything to do with anybody there, will come to you. Now once you get on Epona, Ingo will get upset and challenge you to a race. If you can get through the race and make him angry enough, he'll challenge you again and put Epona on the line this time. If you defeat Ingo the second time, you win Epona, finding out that he was going to give that horse to Ganondorf. So now he's in some trouble. He closes the gate and tells you that while you have the horse, you cannot leave. Now, of course, you can jump the fence or jump a wall to escape in a pretty incredible cutscene, and now you've got Epona to help you in your travels for the rest of the game. Malon is grateful, and Ingo ends up becoming rather humble, just happy to still be allowed to work at the ranch. Talon and Malon take back over, and this is just a tiny quest in the grand scheme of things, but it's nice to start winning some small battles like this to right the world from the evil of Ganondorf. And now with that, let's head into Kakariko so we can prepare for the Forest Temple. When you leave the village, it's not changed too much. A few people have left and several people from Castletown now reside there. But you need to head out to the graveyard and move a stone in order to find your way into a crypt. Now once you're inside, you'll see the ghost of Dompe the Gravekeeper. He'll challenge you to a race and just ask you to keep up with him. Now it is a bit of a challenge because if he even gets slightly ahead of you, you can lose him completely. But once you get to the end, Dompe will give you the hook shot, which is one of the most incredible items in the game. This thing is essential to reach the Forest Temple. Once you've gotten the hook shot, you can make your way out through the windmill, where you can also learn the Song of Storms before heading out to make your way back to the forest. The forest has been overrun with monsters. It's a mess, and as you get through them, you need to make your way up into the Lost Woods. Inside there, you've got to follow the sound of the music as you make your way closer to the Forest Temple. The trek back through your childhood home feels so jarring. It's the same, but it's not. It's a reminder that everything is always changing. Nothing truly stays the same. The fight to get through the forest is pretty arduous, and it's easy to get lost and sent back out to the start. But if you keep moving forward, you'll eventually run into Mino again. He's guarding the way for Saria, and he won't let you through, but when you eventually play her song, it lets him know that you're her friend, and even though he doesn't recognize you since children of the forest don't grow up, he reluctantly allows you to pass in a pretty sad moment. Follow the music further and you'll reach the meadow. There are some powerful moblins here that will charge you if they see you. You've got to get behind them and attack with the hookshot to take them out. Eventually you'll get past the initial few and you'll make your way to a long, narrow path where there's another moblin with a big club. If you get past him, you'll reach the place where you once met Saria to learn her song. But now, Sheik shows up and teaches you the minuet of the forest, which will let you teleport back to the forest temple whenever you play it. These little moments like this with Sheik feel special even today. The forest temple is designed by the plot to be the first dungeon for adult Link to face, and it's one of the most memorable dungeons in the entire game. The door to the temple is guarded by 2 werewolves, and yeah, they're intimidating, but go down pretty easily. And then it's on inside. When you get to the main chamber, 4 Poe sisters will take off with their flames, barring the elevator to the lower level of the temple. Now you've got to find and defeat the 4 sisters to restore the access to the elevator. The temple has some courtyard areas and several directions that you can go into. Not long after you start to progress inside, you'll come across 2 Stalfos. These guys can be tough, but they're really just more of a setup for what's to come. In order to get too far into this dungeon, you've got to find the fairy bow. It's basically a more powerful slingshot in terms of how it functions. But in order to get there, you'll have to face 2 more Stalfos, and if you don't defeat them fast enough, they'll respawn and keep this fight going, which can be really, really frustrating. Once you get the bow, it's just a matter of dealing with the Poe sisters, and their painting puzzle is a great foreshadowing for what's to come. The atmosphere here in the Forest Temple is more intense than anything previously encountered in the game, with a feeling of suspense and wonder as you make your way through. There's just this sense of foreboding as you make your way down towards the final chamber. Once you enter the room, you'll see paintings all over of a castle at night. The room is otherwise empty until you try to leave. A gate closes and blocks the path as Ganondorf appears, or his phantom form. The Phantom Ganon is one of the coolest bosses from the entire series. This is only about the halfway point in the game too, and he is absolutely intimidating. The battle is fairly simple, as he will retreat up into the paintings and then come out of another one to attack. There's more than one choice as well, so you have to pick the right painting to shoot him as he's coming out, otherwise he's just going to turn around and charge from the direction. Now, after his charges don't work, Phantom Ganon will get frustrated and emerge from the paintings, flying around the room and playing energy tennis. Now, this is something that's used a lot in the series, but it's hardly something to complain about with the amount of tropes that this series is known for. The battle is extremely intense, and when he finally falls, Ganondorf banishes him for his failure. After the Phantom is dealt with, Saria is freed and you visit the Sacred Realm again. She has been chosen as the Forest Sage. It's another bittersweet moment here. You get to see your childhood friend again, but you both have extremely important responsibilities now. As she says, it's destiny that you cannot live in the same worlds. You have a destiny to save Hyrule. Now, in my opinion, this was the perfect battle for this point in the game. It brought the focus back to the real threat. It gave you a taste of his evil, and it's a battle that revitalizes and pushes the player to keep going. It was just a phantom, but you did learn one thing. You can defeat Ganondorf. Just keep fighting. The Kiri Forest is back to normal now that the Forest Temple has been restored. After departing the Sacred Realm, you're teleported to the site of the Great Deu Tree. And there, in front of the husk of the Deu Tree, is now a Deku Sprout. A new tree is growing. The sprout is further proof that this world still has hope. The sprout tells Link that he's actually a Hylian and not a Kokiri. The sprout then tells Link about how he came to be in the forest. His mother taking him there during the Great War to keep him safe. And that he was a child of destiny. His fate was set in motion from his birth. Link is then again tasked with saving Hyrule before departing for his next target. After leaving the Forest Temple, you'll eventually head back up to the Temple of Time. And while Link is an adult now, this isn't the end of your adventures as a child. As you reach the room where you drew the Master Sword, Sheik is waiting on you. There's a brief meeting where he tells you a little bit about the sages that you have to help, and that you can return back to your youth by placing the sword back in the pedestal. Sheik then teaches the Prelude of Light. This song lets Link teleport back to the Temple of Time and can save a lot of backtracking for you. The run-ins with Sheik always feel special, as if somehow you knew each other better than you realize, and they all end with Sheik vanishing. The next stop is Death Mountain, where the Gorons are mostly missing. Something's very wrong here. If you're able to stop the rolling Goron, he tells you that his name is Link. Link had made such an impression on Darunia as a child that he named his own son after him. It's a really sweet gesture, but young Goron Link then tells you that his father has gone to the Fire Temple. This is bad news. He's there to fight a dragon. Link heads to Death Mountain Crater, and he has to use the hook shot to make his way towards the Fire Temple. Once he gets there, Sheik will arrive and give another riddle before teaching the Bolero of Fire. As you can tell by now, pretty much each time you reach a temple, Sheik's going to appear and teach you a song that lets you teleport back to that temple. And the good thing about that is that if you find yourself needing to backtrack for any reason, you can get back to these temples easily. And it saves a lot of time on traveling through areas on repeat. It's a pretty clever trick utilized by Nintendo to help hide the sometimes repetitive nature of this game's exploration. Once you get inside the Fire Temple, you run into Darunia. He's there because Ganondorf is trying to sacrifice his people to the evil dragon in the temple as a warning to all of the other races. Darunia asks Link to save the captured Gorons as he goes after the dragon, sending Link to scour the entire temple to find all of the captured Gorons. The Fire Temple is an enjoyable dungeon, but the brown and red aesthetic feels a bit dull. Not that it doesn't make sense since, we're in a volcano. The trick here is to find all of the keys to unlock the Gorons. As you progress, you'll run into each one, setting them free, and This temple does have a few interesting traps to keep you on your toes, and it feels absolutely massive. It may just be the impression I got, but it feels like this may be the biggest dungeon in the game, in terms of just sheer space. Eventually you'll get the secret item for the dungeon, the Megaton Hammer. Now this hammer can be used on enemies, and it's a good ground pound with a small area effect, and it also helps deal with some of the puzzles here in the temple. After you've gotten all the Gorons to safety, it's time to go face the dragon. Once you reach the boss room, the dragon will emerge from the platform. Volvagia, the lava dragon, has been brought back to life by Ganondorf. This dragon had previously been defeated by a Goron hero using the Megaton Hammer. This battle, just like the other ones, it's intense. The dragon can do a lot of damage to you as you are engaging in a high-stakes version of whack-a-mole. You can technically cheese this boss battle by hanging onto the side of the platform whenever Volvagia is flying around. As he flies, stones fall from the ceiling, making it very dangerous. Now, after this extremely intense battle here, Volvagia will get frustrated and burn itself up and fall. Man, what is it with the fire bosses in this game just giving up and ending themselves in fire and burning alive like this? Anyways, after you've saved the Gorons, Link is taken back to the Chamber of Sages where Darunia has effectively become the Sage of Fire, giving you his power. It's interesting how the people that are specifically connected to your story in each situation end up as the sages. But this is the Legend of Zelda, an interactive fairy tale. It's fitting that these heroes of their own people are also the sages that help you fight along your way. One of the criticisms of the N64 was that the developers were limited in how big their games could be. Cartridges were faster with loading times and harder to pirate, but their space was limited. Nintendo during this time became experts in maximizing their game worlds to make the games feel as big as possible, and Ocarina of Time was the shining example of this. But as a result, you end up a lot of the time in the same places over and over again. Now, I did find this a bit tedious on this playthrough, but games aren't designed quite like this anymore. There tends to be a lot less backtracking in games today and less reason to revisit locations. I remember when I was younger, I could spend hours in old locations in games because I was able to accept the games for what they were and simply enjoy the atmosphere. I know when I played this back then that I spent a lot of time in only a few locations, and it makes me a bit sad that I'm not that way anymore with games. I don't feel that drive to just hang out with the characters in any town or anything anymore like that. And this one helped me to get back to that, if only to a small degree. You don't just play Ocarina of Time. You come to live in the world of Hyrule. You enjoy the company of other citizens of Hyrule as you explore this world. It's familiar, and these days, familiar is a good thing. After this, it's time to go check on the Zora. The trek back to their domain is about the same now, but once you get there, you realize that something terrible has happened. The Zoras Domain is completely frozen over. The Zora are missing, and their king is encased in ice. If you slip past him, you can head up to where Lord Jabu Jabu resided, and he's gone. It's crazy just how much this place has suffered under Ganondorf's rule. Now you can make your way out onto the lake, which is partially iced over, and use those ice platforms to reach the ice cavern. The cavern is a fun mini dungeon that gives Link access to blue fire. Now you can bottle it and you can use it to destroy red ice that's blocking passages, and more importantly, to unfreeze the king. But the most important thing to find here in this dungeon is the iron boots. These are essential to get through the water temple without a ton of headache. Strap these on and you can forget about running, but you'll sink to the bottom of any water and you won't slide on ice. Once the king's been restored, he'll give you the Zora tunic, allowing you to breathe underwater. Now you can explore the bottom of the lake, or really any body of water that you encounter, without fear of drowning. This allows for even more exploration options, especially when you combine it with the iron boots. But now, it's time to drop down to the bottom of Lake Hylia and enter the water temple. This temple can be the most frustrating and tedious of all the temples in the game. There's a lot of changing from floor to floor, playing with the water levels, trying to navigate this temple. Princess Ruto is here, and she's rather upset with Link for disappearing for 7 years. But she needs your help with the temple, trying to save her people. The water temple is a polarizing dungeon. I thought it was enjoyable enough, even if I did feel lost a good bit of the time. You've got to make your way through the different levels of the water temple, and the water level adjustments just do give this a unique feeling, but it can be a little tedious. There's plenty of uses for your hookshot here, largely to hit switches and force your way through. And this is also home of the most iconic mini-boss in the entire franchise. You'll make your way into a large room with a tree in the middle, and when you get close, Dark Link appears. This battle is one of the greatest challenges in the entire game. He matches your moves and is invulnerable to most of the weapons aside from the sword and hammer. It's a great test to see how well you can adapt, and more importantly, it's a test for Link to see if he is truly cut out to be the hero of time. Now eventually Link is successful and is able to get past his shadow to move on through the temple. And it's after this that you upgrade the hookshot with the long shot. It gives you a lot more range than the hookshot ever had, which makes it one of the sadder secret weapons in the game, since it's just a length addition to an original item. But it's incredibly useful, so it's fine. While the water temple has the best mini-boss in Dark Link, the actual boss is probably the biggest disappointment in the game, at least in my opinion. It's time to take on Morpha, which is a blob of a creature that uses water to create tentacles to strike Link. Morpha can dish out a ton of damage if you're grabbed, but it's not too hard to dodge. The trick here is to grab Morpha with a long shot and yank it out of the water to attack it. You just have to keep this up and dodge when it's coming out, then yanking it back over for another attack, and you'll take Morpha down pretty easily. Once this blob falls, the water drains from the room and you can progress through the portal back to the sages. We learn that, no surprise, Ruto is the water sage. And while she's happy that you've saved her people, she understands that your destiny is more important than her desire to marry Link. Like Saria, you've got different lives and you can't live in each other's. But now, it's time to move on. Lake Hylia and the Zora are restored, and now we're really starting to get closer to the end. There's a brief meeting with Sheik where you get to enjoy seeing your handiwork as the beautiful lake is restored to its glory. Sheik then disappears as you're examining the lake, hiding atop a tree and then diving away from Link when his back's turned. Now, once you leave Lake Hylia, if you explore Hyrule, you'll eventually find that Kakaro Village is burning. Sheik is there and warns you about a monster in the well. It throws Sheik and then knocks out Link. When you wake, it's dark and Sheik is checking on you. He tells you about the Shadow Spirit and it is now broken free from the well where it had been sealed. Impa has gone to the Shadow Temple to confront this evil spirit. Sheik then teaches you the Nocturne of Shadow so that you can get back to the Shadow Temple before departing again. Now, if you've spent time around the windmill as an adult, the man there will complain about this kid who played a song that caused havoc years ago. He'll then teach you that song, as we briefly mentioned before. So, if you want to create a time loop, you can head back there as a kid and play the Song of Storms. It'll cause the windmill to spin wildly and drain the well outside, allowing Kid Link to make his way down. And it's pretty important as you need to explore this mini dungeon in the well in order to get the Lens of Truth. Without it, you'll have a much more difficult time trying to beat this game. The dungeon in the well is based around illusions. Even the entryway involved walking through an illusory wall. The well is one of the creepiest places in the game, especially when you take on Dead Hand, a creepy zombie-like creature with dead hands coming up from the ground that will grab Link. He's not a difficult enemy, but he's terrifying, a weird horror in a world of fantasy. Now, once you defeat him, you get the Lens of Truth, which makes navigating the dungeons so much easier. Now, you can find more things here in the well, but you've got what you need. So for us, it's time to go back to the Shadow Temple and take on the evil that has tried to destroy Kakaro Village. In order to get into the Shadow Temple, you've got to light all of these surrounding torches in a short time. This really requires the use of magic, which is a good thing for us because now we get to talk about the Great Fairy Fountains. Now the first encounter you have with a fountain should be on Death Mountain, where your magic bar ends up being expanded. The fairies who reside in these locations will help Link to become more powerful, and they'll also fully heal you anytime you stop by. They each have their own unique ways of helping Link and powers to bestow. The fairies feel a lot like a throwback to the goddesses who created Hyrule in the origin story of the world. They're extremely powerful, but they aren't overly concerned with what's happening in the world around them. Now the most powerful, at least to me, the most powerful ability that any of the fairies offer is Din's Fire. This sends an explosion of fire out in all directions, and once you have it, you can open the way to the Shadow Temple. This dungeon is more linear than the others, which gives it a nice change of pace, so long as you have the Lens of Truth. It helps you to see through all the dungeon's tricks. Earlier than in any other temple, you gain access to the temple's special item, the winged boots, as well as the map. The developers knew here that this one needed to break up the formula just a bit. Now the boots will help you to stay elevated for short bits of time, making it a lot easier to clear some otherwise insurmountable gaps. It's the scariest dungeon in the game, as the whimsical nature of Ocarina of Time takes a much darker turn here for a bit, in between the fire in Kakariko, the well, and now this temple within a graveyard. It's a nice change of atmosphere, which, in a game where you're going through the same locations over and over, is greatly appreciated. Now, the Shadow Temple is a long dungeon and does have its fair share of puzzles, and despite being more linear than the rest of the game, I know it's possible, but I can't imagine trying to get through this temple without the Lens of Truth. When you finally make your way near the end, you'll wind up on a small ship that floats along in the air. On it, you'll be greeted with two Stalfos again, and you've got to take them down before you reach the end of the line, where the ship will fall. From there, you can jump ship and make your way across the last short stretch. Just a few more Lens of Truth puzzles, and you'll reach one of the most talked about bosses in the game. The Lair of Bongo Bongo. This battle can be a lot of fun, or a ton of frustration. The hand slapping will keep you bouncing around unless you're wearing the hover boots, but when you wear them you lose a lot of dexterity and makes dodging the hands even harder. Now the goal here is to shoot both of his hands, which will lead to him charging. When you use Lens of Truth, you can see his eye and shoot it, giving you a chance to go in for an attack. It's a little tricky here, but if you keep it up, you'll eventually take Bongo Bongo down. Now this is a great test of all of your skills to this point, and once he falls, you'll head back to meet with the sages, and now Impa is there as the Sage of Shadow. Kakariko Village has been saved. Impa tells you about what happened that night when she fled with the princess. It's a more direct moment than the others, as Impa is all business. She then gives you her power as well, and Link continues on his way. Now it's time to go to the Temple of Light. In order to get into the Temple of Light, you've got to make your way to the Gerudo lands. They will capture Link and lock him up, but since they don't bother to take his weapons, he's able to escape pretty easily. On your way there, you'll run into the contractor from Kakariko Village. His men have all been captured by the Gerudo as well. You have to go free his men, but that is easier said than done. In order to make your way around, you have to incapacitate the Gerudo without being spotted, or you'll end up being captured all over again. And once you do reach the men, you'll have to battle ambushing Gerudo women in order to free them. And with them, one good shot and you're right back in the dungeon. Now once you free the last of the carpenters, another Gerudo will show up and congratulate you on getting past all the guards, letting you become a member of the Gerudo tribe. After this, they'll stop capturing you, and now you can make your way into the desert to find the Spirit Temple. The trip out through the desert sees you navigating a storm, and this temple requires you to go back in time to your youth. Once you're inside, you realize that you can't get anywhere now. So when you go to leave the temple, Sheik shows up and will teach you the Requiem of Spirit, which lets you travel back to the Spirit Temple, and more importantly, will let you get there as a child, because when you try to go through this area as a kid, you will be stopped every time. Now that you have a way back to the temple, you can head to the Temple of Time and change back to a child before returning to the Desert Colossus. As you enter the temple, you'll run into a Gerudo and she'll ask you for help once you tell her that you hate Ganondorf. She is Noboru, the second in command of the Gerudo, and she's trying to rob the temple to thwart Ganondorf's plans, sending you through a small tunnel deeper into the temple. Child Link will traverse a section of the temple and search for some of the items that Noboru wanted from you. The most terrifying section here is when you run into an Iron Knuckle. These enemies hit like a truck and they're a nightmare to run into. especially as a child. And once you eventually get past him, you'll run into the old owl again, and he talks a bit about how you've progressed so far, warning you about the upcoming boss battle with the two witches. From there, you can get the silver gauntlets, which greatly increase your strength, but you're reminded that you have to return them to Noboru. At the same time, you'll hear her shouting, and after that you can see two witches capturing Noboru. So I guess you won't have to give her the gauntlets after all. There's nothing else that you can do here as Child Link, so once you change back to the adult timeline, you can use the gauntlets to move a block that had been blocking your path previously to get inside the temple. Now you're able to make your way through the Spirit Temple, and there's several puzzles here using the theme of light, including a mirror shield that can be used to shine light around in some instances. As you progress, you'll eventually run into the two witches again, and they'll activate another iron knuckle to face you, but this one seems slightly different. Now, once you take this guy down, you'll learn that this guy is Noboru. She had been forced into servitude as an iron knuckle by the witches. Now they come back and capture her again before retreating deeper into the temple. Once you chase after them, the two witches will emerge, known as Twin Rova. The trick to facing them is to reflect their magic back on each other so that you can go in for attacks. Once you've done this enough, the two will get frustrated and merge into one, becoming twice as powerful. But the plan of attack is still basically the same. You can charge up one of the elements in your shield and fire it back on her to stun her so that you can get in and get some attacks in with your sword. It's an exciting battle, possibly the most exciting up to this point. These two witches raised Ganondorf. They are pure evil and they deserve everything that Link gives back to them. Now their death is one of the most amusing that I've ever seen in a game, as they start to prepare another attack before realizing that the other one is dead. They had no idea that they died in battle, and they keep arguing with one another in a pretty hilarious scene as they pass on. But from there, it's time to head back to the sages, where, shocker, Noboru is the spirit sage. Now you've gained the power of the sages. The time to confront Ganondorf is nearly here. When Link gets back to the Temple of Time, Sheik is there and talks about your final showdown. But there's something important that you have to know. And this is where we get another flashback story about the sacred triangles. The Triforce. Sorry, I'll never get over the triangles thing. The legend tells that if your heart is not balanced, the Triforce will split when you try to use it, letting you know what happened to Ganondorf. So he doesn't have the full Triforce, only keeping the Triforce of power. Sheik then lets you know that you, Link, hold the Triforce of courage, and that the Triforce of wisdom resides with Sheik, who reveals that she's really Zelda, disguised to hide from Ganondorf. Zelda reflects on that night and the decision to leave the Ocarina behind for Link, and lets him know that she is the seventh sage before giving him the divine arrow of light. It's a special arrow that destroys darkness. Just before things go from a glimmer of hope to possibly Hyrule's darkest hour though, when Ganondorf finds Zelda and captures her, taking her back to his castle along with her piece of the Triforce. Now, only one course of action remains. Link must head to Ganondorf's castle and face the King of Evil. Ganondorf's castle is a twisted structure standing where Hyrule Castle had stood before. And now, with the power that you've received from the sages, you can create a way to reach the castle. This place is intimidating and looks every bit the final dungeon that it is. Inside the castle, you've got to head through different rooms to break down barriers so that you can make your way higher into the castle. Each room coinciding with a different spiritual ability. This has a boss run type feel as you play miniature dungeons within the castle. This thing is massive and absolutely lives up to being that final dungeon for this game. You can get the golden gauntlets as well, which give you even more strength as you can go through the different rooms where you have to break out every skill that you've learned throughout the entire game in order to keep going forward. Eventually, you'll take down the barriers one by one, getting to the end of the challenges so that each of the sages can intervene and take down their section of the barrier. It's nice to see this use of the sages here to help you one last time before you head deeper into the castle. Link isn't alone. He has friends, he has support, and he has to defeat Ganondorf. There's a determination I felt during this castle that I have not felt in a video game in a very long time. Once you get inside the tower and you start heading up, you'll go through some recap battles of the enemies that you've faced along the way, from the Lizalfos to the Stalfos, and even a double Iron Knuckle battle. As you make your way higher, you'll eventually reach the main chamber, and you'll find that Ganondorf has been playing his own castle theme the entire time, building up his own anticipation of your arrival even as you fought your way closer to him. This guy is the epitome of evil and the personification of confidence and arrogance. He's already basically won, but 7 years after taking over, he's been forced to watch on as this pesky hero has done everything he can in his power to undo all of Ganondorf's work. Now, it's time for the ultimate showdown. Ganondorf runs off Navi with his power, meaning that for the first portion of this battle at least, you can't Z-target him, taking away one of the most important elements that you've come to rely on through the entire game, showing you that he has no problem cheating. He demands that you return the Triforce to him before he goes on the attack, laughing confidently at Link. Ganondorf will engage in more energy tennis for the first section of the battle, eventually giving you the opening to go in and beat the crap out of him with your sword. Now, after enough damage is dealt, the Gerudo Nightmare will recoil, surprised that he's been defeated. He lashes out with his power and his rage destroys the room that you're in before he falls. Then Zelda is finally released. Now, the castle starts to crumble and you've got a short time to make your way down and out before you're trapped inside. It's a frantic race down and out of the castle, having to travel over balconies and downstairs and weaving in and out of the castle while trying to protect Zelda as she opens the locked gates with her powers. At one point, 2 more Stalfos show up, and you've got to take them down so that Zelda can help you to get out of the castle. All the while, a timer is ticking down to the castle's destruction. Once you get out, you turn to watch the castle collapse. It's an absolutely incredible sight to see, especially for a game of its time. This isn't a pre-rendered scene. It's using the assets in the game, and it's absolutely stunning. The castle also falls perfectly down leaving you with a perfect boss arena for a final showdown. Ganondorf isn't dead just yet. Navi returns as you hear a loud boom. Link then heads over to investigate, as he knows clearly this isn't over. Ganondorf rises from the ashes and uses the Triforce, letting his anger and hatred manifest as he becomes Ganon. This is the origin story of the Great Beast, the evil that has plagued Hyrule in all of the previous games leading up to this point. You've got to attack his tail to stun him and do damage. This battle is surprisingly easy compared to some of the others, but it's still absolutely exciting, letting you really think about what you've been through as you take on Ganon in this final epic showdown. Now, once Link finally gets him worn down enough, Ganon will fall to his knees, allowing Link to retrieve the Master Sword. Now, it's just a matter of continuing to wail on Ganon until he finally falls. He is determined to defy death here, but you're Link. You are the hero of time, and Ganon's time is up. Now, when Ganon falls again, Zelda will use her power to hold him in place, and Link can then use the Master Sword and slam it into his skull, finally defeating the King of Evil. Somehow, even with this, he doesn't die, but the sages will lend their power and seal away Ganon. This is it. The evil has finally been defeated. Link has saved Hyrule. As he's sealed away, Ganon leaves a curse on Link and Zelda that will bind the three into an endless loop. Evil will rise, a hero will emerge, and a princess with the royal blood will have to suffer to resist this never-ending evil cycle. It sets the tone for every future game while also giving us a glimpse into the past, putting a nice bow on everything to this point. Zelda then sends Link back to his own time to restore the years that he had lost and to give him back his childhood. Link returns the ocarina to the princess and they say their goodbyes. It's a touching moment here, where Link is given the chance to go back and reclaim his youth. He did it. He saved Hyrule from the great evil, and at that, we roll credits. Seeing the world is restored, peace reigning over the land again, and many of the citizens of Hyrule gathering together at Talon Ranch to celebrate. It's just sad that Link isn't there. I know it's meant to be a touching moment, but this victory had no celebration for the one who earned it. He was sent back to a time where none of it ever even happened. Even Navi leaves Link now. It's time to move on. And I honestly, I don't want to, but that's Ocarina of Time. In the game's final moment, Link as a child comes back to the castle and meets up with Zelda, and the two share a moment together as the game fades out to the end. This game is a masterpiece. It's an absolute masterclass in game design, and the victories Nintendo had here creatively have crafted the entire industry ever since. I could go on and on about how incredible this experience has been for another hour, but I've kept you here long enough, and from the bottom of my heart, if you're hearing this right now, if you've stuck with me to this point, I thank you. It was an incredible experience going through this classic game. Nintendo worked within their own limitations at the time on the N64 and created a massive classic that showed that while they may not have been the top dogs in the industry anymore, Nintendo was far from finished, and they're still going strong today. I'm so happy that I was able to put this together, my tribute to a game that is absolutely worthy of all of the accolades that it has received and continues to receive to this day. I'm the Unhinged Gamer, and I thank you for hanging out with me here in Hyrule, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.